This program was made possible by a grant from S.R. Foxley and Q, and by the generous support of viewers like you. If you wish to join them in pledging to this channel, please find a link to the Prophet of Zod Patreon below. So I recently got a comment to my Who Are You to Question God video asking me a very interesting question. What is truth? Now there are two different ways to look at this question. One, this person literally didn't know what truth was and was hoping I could provide a definition. Or two, he was trying to walk me through some sort of really predictable apologetics argument. Of course, both of these were totally realistic possibilities, but it was definitely the second one. So since I naturally saw where he was going, I decided to give a literal answer to the question before describing exactly what we all suspect he was going to do. Now you might think this would make him realize I saw where he was going and that his canned gotchas weren't going to work on me. But nope, he wasn't about to let me ruin his fun. So he came back with the question, how do you know what is real? Now if what is truth didn't tip you off, then this one must have, right? Because this sounds like it could have come right out of the mouth of scholarly geniuses like Cy Ten Bruggencate, or that guy who managed to be the son of Kent Hovind and still underachieve. As I understand it, and I'll admit I'm not most familiar with this school of thought, this question is supposed to instantly and totally undermine atheists. Because without God, all we have are our senses, and since our senses provide incomplete information and could potentially be deceived, we really don't have any basis for knowledge. For all any of us atheists know, we could just be a brain in a vat or something. Or time could even be an illusion, and all that exists is one moment of consciousness in which our minds are arranged in a way that creates the illusion of memories and of an anticipated future. The point is, the possibilities are endless, so to have any true certainty about what's real, you need an ultimate truth giver, God, to provide that information. Thus, atheists have no basis for knowing or arguing about anything. Anticipating where this was headed, I tried sorting out for him the difference between 100% absolute certainty that there's no way you could possibly be wrong, which I think is an impossible and even incoherent idea, and what we might call functionally absolute certainty, which is based on taking the world as we observe it for granted while discounting worthless and far-fetched brain-in-the-vat type possibilities. This proceeded as you might generally expect, and I want to breeze through the unfolding of this conversation before organizing my thoughts into more topical concluding points. First, he accused me of changing my definition of certainty, because of course he did. I replied that I wasn't, that I was only hashing out different ways the word could functionally be used, and that whatever problem this presented to atheists is a problem for theists as well. He, of course, wasn't going to have this, and beat the shit out of the semantics of the word certain, along with doing the standard, if you can't be certain of anything, then how can you be certain we can't be certain thing? Yay! Then he wrapped up by asking if it's impossible for the God of the Bible to exist. I took a moment to die a little inside, then proceeded to put too much effort into this response, in which among other things I explained that the God of the Bible has some apparently contradictory qualities, but that I usually don't worry too much about whether an unfounded claim is absolutely impossible. He then chided me for including any necessary and intelligent nuance into my answer to his yes-no question, and I sighed and said that since there are a lot of shifting definitions of even the God of the Bible, I can't totally discount it, so I'd play his game and answer no. It's not impossible, fully aware of the tedium I was inviting in my life. So yeah, I guess it's kind of my fault. He then asked whether it's possible that if God exists, he could make a person certain of things. I replied that an all-powerful being could also deceive you into thinking you were certain about things you were not, which kind of undermines the whole idea. He replied with a lot of boring reiteration, and then said something key. I didn't say an all-powerful being. I said the God of the Bible. At this point I started getting too busy to continue, and also felt like I'd abundantly satisfied all my curiosity about where this conversation might go, because this line made it clear there was no argument or even discussion going on at all. This was an interesting learning experience, and it gave clear, concrete examples of things I kind of knew but didn't think too directly about. Maybe you're already fully aware of these, and maybe not, but we're already well into the video, so you might as well stick around either way, right? First, notice the questions and propositions this guy kept throwing out. What is truth? How do you know what is real? Is it impossible for the God of the Bible to exist? Each of these was transparently meant to maneuver me to a gotcha moment in which I would inadvertently agree to something that must be logically true. Kind of a silly abuse of the Socratic method with an overly rigid destination and even journey in mind. But of course his conclusion isn't nearly as inevitable as he thinks, which means that for this shtick to work, he needs to exaggerate what I meant by agreeing to him and also hold me to concessions I only made for the sake of argument. Second, to keep me reined in and headed toward the conclusions he wanted me to reach, he had to do two really annoying things. 1. Stubbornly hold me to pointless and unrealistically rigid definitions of words, and 2. Demand yes-no answers from me, essentially to force me to take sides in a false dilemma implicitly set up by the question. These tactics are related and usually used in concert with each other. For example, his insistence on a weirdly absolute definition of certainty was meant to imply a choice between a type of certainty nobody would ever have and absolute intellectual chaos where you can't even be functionally certain about anything, which is why he wouldn't accept anything other than a yes-no answer about certainty. He had preemptively defined what my yes or no would mean in ways that would be convenient for him either way. So when I saw what he was doing and tried to undermine this by adding my own qualifications to my own answer, actually participating in the conversation, he always got testy and was quick to correct me. You'll find that apologists will very often engage in some form of this behavior, and it's important to understand that this is entirely unfair and relies on ignoring basically all nuance behind language and concepts, all for the purpose of keeping the conversation restricted to a deliberately simplified and prepackaged series of deductions that nobody would make if Christianity hadn't existed ahead of time and is just a masturbatory exercise in asserting God's existence using a lot of complex words. Finally, he insisted not only on certain definitions, but on certain terms. Note his insistence on using the word God of the Bible and not all-powerful being. I think most Christian apologetics do this implicitly or explicitly to some extent, and it's really a blatant form of cheating that, as I mentioned previously, is meant to ignore hypothetical possibilities that make his argument meaningless, thus simply using words to arrive at his pre-existing conclusion. See, his argument is that, assuming my atheistic position, I can't be certain about anything because of the whole brain in the vat thing. He, however, could be totally certain, because God could hypothetically give him that certainty. But my observation that an all-powerful being could deceive him into thinking he was perfectly certain utterly destroys his argument and makes it useless. It shows that if an atheist can't be perfectly certain, neither can a theist for various reasons, the most parsimonious one, of course, being that there are no higher beings and he just overestimates his personal feeling of certainty. So he needs to rely on terminology, wedging assumptions into the conversation from the outside and taking them for granted, even though there's no conceivable way that the theoretical perceiver inside the mental exercise could ever know the difference between an all-powerful being conveying real certainty and an all-powerful being deceiving him with false certainty. Thus, the whole mental exercise is pointless and just boils down to Christian assumptions. This utterly destroys the how can you know anything argument, but it also illustrates the fact that more broadly, at least 90% of apologetics fall back on pre-existing assumptions about God that believers learned at church and just imported into the conversation. For example, if Jesus rose from the dead, does that mean he's God? No. But believers are taught he was God, so they just automatically make that connection even though it doesn't follow from the argument. Anyway, this was just a few quick observations based on a discussion that I found enlightening. I think I'm a little sick, so my voice isn't the best this week, and I didn't have as much time as usual for YouTubing, but I hope this was useful. Until next time.